You're now listening to the sound of sanity. This sound will continue for the duration of the program. Hey everybody, welcome to Sound of Sanity. My name is Nathan Albertson. I am your humble and obedient host. So excited to join you for part 2 of our epic fantasy series. Clad in a gray cloak, riding upon a unicorn, out of the sky, it's Benjamin Sulzer.
I decided to stop by today, Nathan. Usually I don't have time for this kind of thing because I'm riding through the vasty lands of Bloomington.
The vasty?
Vasty. It sounds like it's kind of a fantasy word.
It's not just vast, but it's
like
kind of vasty.
It's like a vasty hall.
Well,
has the quality of vastness.
Wait, what's this? I just felt a cold chill, as if a warrior was among us. Ben, you better describe who just entered the podcasting space.
Clad in copper mail? I don't know. It looks like copper to me.
Tin, maybe?
No, I think it's copper.
Yeah, probably copper.
It's pretty cool. It's cooler than tin.
Yeah.
Clad in copper mail, wielding a golden sword.
Wow, that's a really crappy soft sword that could be cut through very easily.
Well, I think he just holds that one for show. He's got like an awesome sword that will cut.
So he's weighed down with an incredibly valuable show sword that he can't use.
I think it's an enchanted sword.
Man.
There we go. There we go.
He's so cool that he just needs a decorative sword. Yeah.
I don't need a real weapon. I'm gonna
that's right.
Great statement of
I'm
power.
completely unintimidated by you.
That's
Be
awesome.
intimidated by my wealth and significance.
Yep.
Well, it's Sir Menzel, folks.
Hey.
He is, of course, pastor. And today, I'm really excited to get back into this. If people will remember from our last episode, we talked about fantasy. We gave kind of a history of fantasy. We talked about fantasy as a genre of speculative fiction that speculates about what if. Every fantasy story begins by asking, what if? What are some examples of some what ifs in fantasy fiction, fellas?
What if I could move rocks with my mind?
What if there were a little race of people that like to live in holes in the ground and just live quiet lives?
What if I had a laser sword and I could just jump anywhere in space I wanted to with a hyperdrive?
What if the said little people, they had really hairy toes?
What if I could change what you're thinking and control your mind simply by asserting it?
Huh. I would say you're a dangerous mutant and the government needs to shut you down, like imprison you and probably experiment on you.
Guilty of an unforgivable curse.
What if it was all a metaphor for social justice issues of today? Oh, brother.
Yeah.
What if I had a little piece of wood that I could use, and if I waved it around and said the right words, I could, make things happen?
Man, be pretty cool.
What if I was a dragon rider in Pern? That'd be cool.
Yeah, that's great, Nathan. That'd be really cool.
What if I was a billionaire who had access to all kinds of military proto-technology and I could dress as a bat and
what if you were also
stalk the night streets?
What if you were a master of every martial art?
Oh, yeah.
Pretty much the greatest fighter of all time.
And also the world's greatest detective?
Yep.
And what if I came from a different planet and my body could soak in the sun's rays and it allowed me to leap over tall buildings and stop moving trains? And
what if I got bit by a radioactive spider and developed only the spider traits that would be cool to have and none of the ones that would be bad or gross?
Yeah, you should stop eating bugs. That's my opinion.
Yeah, especially ones that have been hanging out by our local nuclear power plant. It's such a bad idea.
Man.
And I'm really not a fan of the egg sac that grows out of you. I feel like that's one of the bad traits.
I thought it was one of the cool ones, guys. I don't get it.
That's what fantasy is. That's what it does. That's what speculative fiction does. We made the point that science fiction does the same thing. It asks what if, but it does it with sciencey stuff. And horror fiction does the same thing, but it's scary. And there's a lot of overlap. I mean, I'm sure we've all, you read or watch Lord of the Rings. It's got some pretty scary parts. Watch The Matrix or Star Wars. Are they fantasy or sci-fi? Is The Matrix sci-fi because they say the word computer a couple times?
Are the Marvel movies fantasy or sci-fi because they say, it's all just science that you don't understand?
Yeah.
This looks like magic.
If Tony Stark says the word nanobots, does that mean that his magic is now science instead of magic?
Answer, yes.
Answer, yes.
100%, baby.
Well, maybe. I mean, some of this is actually just the trappings. I mean, I would argue if they make it seem kind of science-y, you can call that science fiction if you want. We're arguing about semantics as much as anything here.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of sci-fi is just asking that what if. If the what if were based in real, well-defined science, then it wouldn't be a what if.
Mm-hmm.
It would just be a possibility.
Yeah, there has to be some leap.
A real possibility. So it has to have some question marks, some gray space where it's like, what if somebody figured out a way to make this happen?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We have the idea that it's possible. We don't know exactly how it maybe could. But what if somebody actually solved it or figured it out?
Yeah. I mean, some sci-fi, what the nerds like to call hard sci-fi, is the stuff that really tries to take those questions seriously and extrapolate based on what we know now exactly what would happen.
Exactly how you would have to.
As opposed to something like...
How would it change society? What would it reveal about human nature?
Well, in some sci-fi is something like 1984, for example. People call it science fiction. He's just describing a totalitarian state. That's all. It's maybe 3% exaggerated, but basically he's just describing something that's happening, and he calls it sci-fi because that lets him get away with certain things. Is that book really science fiction? Is it hard science fiction? Is it just a book about a totalitarian state, like a lot of totalitarian states that exist?
Dystopian fantasy, Nathan.
Is it, Jake?
Yeah.
Anyway, I guess
maybe to you it's a utopian fantasy.
Yeah. I love Big Brother.
The Iron Hand of Nathan.
Yeah, the Iron Hand of Nathan. You guys know my dream of being a fascist dictator over a totalitarian dystopian state, right?
All too well.
All too well. I've showed you the giant posters that I want of my face hanging from buildings and stuff like that.
Well, I mean, there was something about a blue laser.
There was something about a blue laser. That's right.
I'm trying to remember what the context of that was, But listeners will hear more. They'll find out more in its time.
Yes. They'll find out about the blue laser, all right. I believe it was a blue fire laser. Okay, so we've talked about what speculative fiction is. We're kind of focusing on fantasy today and in these last two episodes, but we've also been kind of focusing about all of it. I think the reason we're zeroing in on fantasy is because A, it's fun and interesting to talk about fantasy, and B, we've already done some stuff on horror fiction before. You can listen to our Dracula episode where we went to the haunted house.
That was a good one.
Yeah, that was a good one. I like that one. We're going to do some sci-fi stuff later this year, Lord willing, when the Dune movie hopefully doesn't get bumped but comes out in December. We are going to, on the Bookening, read Dune, and we are going to, on Sound of Sanity, talk more specifically about sci-fi and stuff. And Dune's actually a great example of something that kind of tries to extrapolate from what's going on today, but also takes a lot of weird, fantastical leaps. But also, it's all based in the ecology and his understanding of politics. And, is it sci-fi? Is it fantasy? I don't know.
Yeah, it just goes to show you that these things could be used to kind of investigate whatever you want to investigate. Like, what are men really like? What are men and women really like? Dune has a lot of stuff like that.
Yes, it certainly does. So it's a rich
mind of, what's that stuff?
Crap. I like Dune. Actually.
I like Dune too.
It's a lot of fun.
Spice,
yes. A rich mind of spice.
There you go.
Very spicy. All right. So, having said all that, now we come to the question that Christians have to ask, and that I think I feel some angst about. I'm sure our listeners, if they enjoy this kind of stuff, have felt some angst about, which is, should a Christian read fantasy? And my answer to that is, yeah. I mean, right, Ben? Fantasy's awesome.
Hey, man, I live in a fantasy world every day.
Yeah.
It's great.
I mean, you literally got a horn, glued it to a horse, and you call it your unicorn.
Yeah, and then I use nanotechnology to make it fly.
Mm-hmm.
People think it's an actual flying unicorn.
Yeah, it's weird. You had nanotechnology, and yet you glued the horn to the horse. Like really a combination of high tech, low tech.
Nanotech can't do horns on horses yet, Nathan. There's limitations you don't understand. You're not a science geek like me.
I know you guys are working around the clock, and oh my stars! Well, I'm sorry that conversation was interrupted, but there's the devil's advocacy alarm. Now, the devil's advocacy alarm, it's been a little while. The devil doesn't always show up, the devil's advocate, I should say, these days on the show. But when the alarm goes off, it means one of us has to play the devil's advocate and argue for the opposite of what we've been saying.
Well, it should probably be me, right? Because, fantasy heroes, I don't know, fantasy villains are ready.
Have you seen my golden sword?
I should have known. The golden sword should have been a tell.
It's a big, shiny, fake threat.
Yeah.
It represents
the big, shiny,
the
fake
devil's advocate.
Why did I not see this coming, listener?
Yeah. If Jake actually liked fantasy, he wouldn't be wearing copper armor, and he wouldn't have a big golden sword.
That copper armor does not do well in the sun, let me tell you.
No, it really doesn't.
Cooking out here, man.
All right, Jake, you're going to play the devil's advocate, and you are going to make an argument that Christians should not read or watch or engage with fantasy or speculative fiction, right?
Yeah, okay, let's do it. All of these what-if questions really come down to one thing. Ultimately, they're asking, what if God were not God? What if God were not God? Let me just explain how I get there, okay? God created an order to the world, a natural order and a moral order. And all of these what-if questions basically amount to, what if God didn't create the moral order the way that he did? Or what if God didn't create the natural order the way that he did? What if the natural or moral order, which are intricately connected, were in some way, somehow, a violation of God's character? What if that were the case? That's the fundamental question that speculative fiction is actually asking. Therefore, it is one genre that we can look at and say it is intrinsically immoral and wrong-headed, and something Christians ought to stay away from.
Let me pile on, because we've actually had an uneasy relationship with this as we've reviewed lots of speculative fiction movies, because inevitably what you'll have is someone like our gal Ahsoka in Clone Wars, who's powered up and is subverting the moral order in that she is a female warrior. And subverting the natural order, and that she has strength and powers that
are not
what God has assigned to her sex.
Yep.
We try to make some space for that, or say it's bad, but we still like Clone Wars because whatever.
And within the context, she's still feminine, a feminine, relatively feminine counterpart to. Yeah, we try to make that space, but we feel that tension. Since we're just piling on, let me go even farther and say, historically, from Augustine and the early Christians rejecting the theater to, really, you basically have just the last, 100 years, a couple hundred years, maybe you can make the case of Christians embracing fiction, much less fantasy and speculative fiction.
So even speculating about what ifs that didn't exactly violate the natural or moral order was something on that shaky ground for a lot of
Christians,
our fathers in the faith,
long time. Better men and bigger men than us.
Anybody else want to pile on here?
No, I'm gonna go burn some Jane Austen though. I'll tell you.
Well, Jane Austen's actually a great example of 300 years ago, whatever it was, in a very conservative Christian community of people who have their love-hate relationship with fiction. She wrote Northanger Abbey to make fun of everything that was stupid about the Gothic fiction of the time, but they liked novels, so the devil might be painting with a pretty broad brush. Yes, Augustine didn't like the theater. Yes, you can find examples of Christians being uncomfortable. I think the devil has a good point, but also it would be painting with too broad a brush to say that Christians have never liked fiction until now.
I'm not going to deny that, since I'm still playing that role, that Christians, there've always been Christians that have indulged in that sort of thing. What I want to say, though, is that it's more or less true that the tide hasn't turned to the broad acceptance of it until the last couple hundred years.
Yeah.
In the last 100 years especially, with just the full-on embracing of all things fictional and fantastical without questions or discernment. We just embrace it as a not even as a something more that's morally acceptable, but as a unquestionable good.
Well,
if Tolkien did it and Lewis did it,
thumbs up.
if it was good enough for Tolkien, it must have been good enough for Jesus and therefore good enough for me.
yeah, that is the syllogism, isn't it? If I was going to make a little space again, I would say we didn't really have the printing press until the 1500s. Christians actually haven't had to deal with the ubiquity and ascendancy of art until now, because society hasn't had to deal with the ubiquity and ascendancy of art. So,
Or the written word.
Exactly. Like, we didn't have popularly printed novels until relatively recently, historically speaking.
The real answer, let's just go ahead and deal with that historical thing right now. The objection to the plays had much less to do with the idea of fiction and much more to do with actors, actresses.
It was actually the degeneracy of what was happening in that world right now.
That's right. So that was the principal objection, for one. For two, there's never been a time where the world has been without fairy tales and stories for children. And we can go back and we can establish fiction, even from parables of Scripture. In some sense, you can say that the parables that we have are what ifs. We've made these cases in other places.
Sure.
I don't know. I want to get rid of that argument. I introduced it, but I want to get rid of it really quickly so that we can actually focus on.
Yeah, I mean, even in the book of Judges, you have Gideon's son telling this parable of talking trees who want a king over them. So that's like, I mean, it's a little anachronistic
God
to
sends
say
dreams of
fantasy fiction.
Corn eating corn and cows eating cows.
Yeah, all kinds of wild, crazy stuff.
That subvert the natural order.
Yeah, I think you have to be, forgive me, but a little bit of a thudding literalist to want to banish all of it. Because at the end of the day, when you start just eradicating our ability to use story and use metaphor, what are you going to do with the Psalms? What are you going to do with the parables? What are you going to do with the...
You basically lose metaphor and symbolism, right?
And the Bible, I mean, what's the percentage of it that's written in metaphor and symbolism? It must be...
It's insane, the amount.
Who knows? I mean, I haven't done the math, but maybe it's over 50. I don't know. It's a lot. Why didn't the prophets just say, this is going to happen, instead of saying, locusts will blah, blah, blah? Well, because that's how God works. He uses symbolism. He uses metaphor. Now, that being said, we've talked about that in other places. We come to the argument specifically about speculative fiction, and the devil has established that the problem with speculative fiction is that it breaks...
He said both it breaks the natural order and it breaks the moral order.
Because they're intrinsically connected, and you can't break one without breaking the other, and both are reflections of God's character.
Okay, so I wanna
And so it's an attack on God.
I just wanna, just for a second, pop back to that parable of the trees and Judges and say, what about the natural order there, Mr. Devil? Because you have talking trees, you have the, they go to the olive tree, they go to the bramble finally, and anyway, you just have all this bizarre stuff that the natural order doesn't do, because trees don't talk and they don't have a king and they don't devour each other with fire and stuff like that. But that all happens in the parable of the trees.
There's a lot of metaphors in the Bible that we could go to that aren't literal. So that's a great point. I also want to just take a step back, though, and say you have started with a premise that I don't think I agree with. You have said that the natural order and the moral order are so inextricably linked that we can't imagine violating one without violating the other. And that it is giving a middle finger to God intrinsically to imagine violating the natural order. And I suppose there's some definition of the natural order that I might agree with that on. But any definition of the natural order that I agreed with that on would always come back to including the moral order. For example, men transitioning into women. That's breaking the natural order. But it's also breaking the moral order. Yeah. Orville and Wilbur Wright creating an airplane that breaks the natural pull of gravity over men. Nobody has a problem with that. That's not
It's not actually breaking the natural order.
No, but it is.
Yeah, that would be my response. Is actually simply using the natural order
in ways we hadn't thought of yet.
Yeah, although, but no, I wouldn't give up that point though, because the point is still God made man to be earthbound.
Mm-hmm.
If God had wanted man to fly, God would have given man wings.
Well, and you can go through history. Atheist, liberal people like to find the places where the church said, if you try and do this scientific thing, then you're breaking the natural order, and we're going to stand in the way of things that are obviously progress looking back hundreds of years. These are actually real fights that people have had about things like medical progress. I mean, there are Christians that won't take penicillin because God made disease. This is a real thing that has real consequences in real people's lives.
Yep.
But I do take penicillin.
So do I.
I've been on airplanes. Yep. And I don't think that I am in violation of God's natural order when I do that. What I think I'm doing is enjoying the fact that God gave us a mandate to fill the earth and subdue it.
Well, yeah, exactly. The direction you're headed is, I think, it is the answer. To ask what if is simply intrinsic to what it means to be human, to be man, to be made in the image of God. There is no way to exercise dominion over the earth without asking what if. And you can go back to the simplest things of what if, instead of wandering and picking fruit and grain, I planted fruit and grain in order.
Mm-hmm.
What if, instead of hunting animals, I captured them and bred them and raised them? What if,
it's the excitement
instead
of the first
sleeping
few...
out in the rain or in a cave, I cut down some trees and I...
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Orville and Wilbur Wright didn't start by saying, we're going to do a bunch of sciencey stuff and, oh, hey, look, the natural order allows us to fly. They started by saying, boy, it would be cool to get around that way.
Wouldn't it be cool if we could fly? I wonder if there's a way to do that.
Yep.
And so it all starts with all creativity, all culture, all cultural development is a function of somebody somewhere asking the question, what if?
Mm-hmm.
And some of those what ifs were outlandish and bizarre and crazy just 100 years ago. Think 100 years ago, we're talking not just what if I could fly, not just what if I could travel around, what if I had a carriage that didn't have a horse.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking everything from what if I could blow up an entire city, what if I could walk on the moon, what if I could have all the world's information in my pocket, what if I could, just like the what ifs.
Yeah, we are living in a sci-fi wonderland. I mean...
Yeah, anybody 100 years ago would look at the world that, what if we could walk into a room that was climate controlled on the inside? We're not even talking about what if the telephone, what if the most basic...
Okay, well, now let me make a little bit more space for the devil, though. Because what you have to admit as you say that is that the relationship between the natural law and the moral law is really complicated. One thing that I said, I just threw this off when we were breaking this episode a week or two ago, is, and I'm sorry, ladies, but would there be feminism if somebody hadn't created washing machines? Would there be feminism if there wasn't an industrial revolution? In other words, we have all this technology that lets women have a whole lot more time. There are moral ramifications to that. You can argue that they're good moral ramifications. You can argue that they're bad. You can argue that they're somewhere in between.
What you can't argue is that there aren't ramifications.
Mm-hmm.
What the Industrial Revolution does is it creates a possibility for the breakdown of the nuclear family.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly, husbands and wives in the family farm aren't the most essential way that we can provide for ourselves or for each other. And we're not a family unit that has to work together in order to make ends meet. Our wife can go and work in the factory and make just as much money as we do.
Mm-hmm. We can go get drunk, actually.
We can go to the pub and get drunk. All this stuff, every little advancement, if you want to even call it that.
Let me give another random example. Automobiles. Yeah. Okay, great. Everybody can get around really fast. We are also accepting the cheapening of human life. Like, thousands of people are going to die because we have these giant movable rockets powered by a flammable substance
Right. But before that, of course, you're accepting that thousands of people are going to die because there's no way to transport things as quickly as a car or a truck can transport them.
But you are making
Can't get them
food,
to
supplies, medicine.
medical.
you are making moral trade-offs.
Oh,
though,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
You're making moral decisions.
You can't help it, but it's also in the way that you use it, and you have to recognize that given the freedom to misuse something, we'll misuse it, and God has always given men that freedom. You know, the human race, the race of man. We've always had the freedom to misuse everything. Oh, cool, we can build chariots of iron. Good, let's enslave our neighbors. Well, so chariots of iron aren't bad, but you're going to use them in a way that's good or evil. And then there's some technology that is just evil.
That's what I wanted to say next. I would argue there are certain things. I mean, we don't have to make this the case on this podcast, but I really wonder the power to destroy an entire city with an atomic bomb. You know, I've often thought about, is that like the kind of power that it's just in how you use it? Or is there just something intrinsically so... It is, in fact, such a violation of the moral and the natural order to have the power to do that we just shouldn't go there. I mean, it's a little bit like the Jurassic Park conundrum, right? Like,
Yeah, it's cloning.
If you could bring dinosaurs back...
Just because you can.
Yeah, doesn't mean you should.
I don't think you're giving us our due credit. Our scientists have done things which nobody's ever done before.
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
And so where I want to make space for the devil is, yeah, maybe there are some things that we just shouldn't do. Maybe there are things that we just shouldn't imagine. Maybe there are things that do violate the natural order in ways that are intrinsically connected to how God made men and what he asks of men, therefore violate the moral order. Where does that get us with fantasy literature? What I want to say is it's hard to make blanket statements. I think the devil made a noble effort. At the end of this podcast, I will be willing to admit that there are some what-ifs that are intrinsically self-defeating, that are intrinsically immoral.
Well, in some what-ifs, it's helpful to ask them so that you can expose them. Right? That's why, I mean, you came up with Jurassic Park as an example of... Because that's the function of Jurassic Park.
Right.
Jurassic Park exists to ask the question.
And to say no. Michael Crichton wanted to say, we have to be really careful with this technology. He didn't care about dinosaurs. He cared about embryonic research and clone research and stuff like this. And what he wants to say is, just because you can do it...
Doesn't mean you should.
And in fact, it means you shouldn't. There are things that you should not do. That's what every great sci-fi cautionary tale
is about. You don't open Pandora's box. It's not even necessarily wrong to ask a what if that does violate the natural order in a way that is evil. The question is, what is the author trying to accomplish, and what does he think is true about the moral order when he asks that question? To ask a question, what if we could make chimeras? What if we could convert the human race into some weird human-animal hybrid? Well, that may be a bad what if you think, wouldn't that be cool? But if you think this is actually something that people have been trying to do and have been working toward, and actually it's horrific, and we ask this what if in a way to demonstrate and show how horrific, awful this would be, that's not a bad what if. That's not a bad premise.
Yeah, you have to,
a book.
In order to evaluate a work of speculative fiction, first you establish what the what if is, and then you ask how the what if interacts with God's moral law.
What is?
What is, yeah. So it's what if and what is, and how do the two go together? I'll give you an example. There was a really popular novel that came out a few years ago called The Power, and it was about teenage girls suddenly getting the power to shoot lightning out of their fingertips. The novel is written as if it's written by a man who's telling the story hundreds of years down the line, and so he's collecting all these historical sources, and he's trying to figure it out, and he's doing interviews, and then he sends it to his publisher, and she writes back to him and says, we really like your book, but we think we should probably publish it under a woman's name so people take it seriously. That's the punchline of the novel. And the idea is that gender roles, as they would call them, have flipped, right? Women suddenly have physical power over men, and so women are...
Everything's changed.
The quote-unquote dominant sex, and the hierarchy of how things work changed.
So sex is just a function of power, really.
Sex is a function of power. Power flipped. I should mention, I forget what the author's name is, but she actually worked for a year under Margaret Atwood, our old friend from The Handmaid's Tale and all that stuff. So Margaret Atwood helped to develop this novel. And it was a huge sensation, and people loved it, and they thought it was so provocative and interesting. I'm not going to say that you couldn't write a novel with the what if girls, when they hit puberty, were able to shoot lightning out of their fingers. I'm going to say your what if must be subservient to what is, and what is a natural sexual hierarchy that God has created that, in fact, would not change if women could shoot lightning out of their fingers.
Because there's more to sexuality and there's more to the economy of how the world works than power.
Right.
And actually, I mean, power is an ambiguous word, right? I mean, think of how much, when women hit puberty, their power over men actually is pretty great.
Yeah, it sure is.
Yeah,
I mean,
no kidding.
It's a cosmic power that shapes the world every day, and any boy can tell you that.
Yes.
Like, duh. It's just not masculine power.
Exactly.
And the pagan world hates that. Like, they hate that there is such a thing as masculine power. They hate that there's hierarchy. But the power that women do have is pretty intense, actually.
And it is borne out in every day-to-day interaction and is borne out in human, on the micro level and on the cosmic, human history level. The fact is, and I think we've said this here before, and I'll say it again, the idea that men have power because they have broad shoulders, strong chests, is completely backwards.
Right.
God designed men to have authority and responsibility, and therefore he gave them broad shoulders and strong arms and strong chests. God designed women to bear life and to be Adam's helper and to be in that position of submission and dependence. And he made them that way. So at the end of the day, the real question isn't, can we ask what ifs that in some way violate either the natural order or our perception of the natural order? The question is, what's the purpose? What's the point of asking the question? What does that tell us about the moral order or the moral law?
Right. In the power, the purpose is to prove a premise that is wicked, which is that sex relationships are based on a hierarchy of brute strength, and that if you reversed that, it would reverse everything. That's just not true.
And we can talk about all the ways that it's not true. The world's full of equalizers already, right? First of all, Ben made a good point in saying
women have all kinds of power.
Women have all kinds of intrinsic power already, for one. For two, the world is full of all kinds of equalizers for brute strength. We call them guns and knives and drones. And
there's no woman right now in an abusive relationship who couldn't end that relationship as soon as her husband falls asleep.
In a show of power and strength.
In a show of physical power. Everybody can shoot lightning out of their hands, metaphorically speaking, because they can shoot bullets.
Literally speaking.
Literally speaking. We already live in a world with all those equalizers, and it actually hasn't changed the hierarchy. Now, okay, where does that get us with the devil's argument? The devil has said...
Well, I mean, is the devil going to ask, if I'm a devil, am I going to ask about, hey, what about the occult? What about that stuff? You can't give people occult powers and tell me you're not messing with the moral law.
We are going to talk about that and get into that. But first, a little break. We'll be right back.
Thanks for loaning me that Harry Potter book, Radiohead, but you know what I realized? I don't think fantasy is really for me.
I understand completely, Ollie. Bleep bloop.
Fantasy, sci-fi, it's all so far-fetched, you know?
Indeed it is, Ollie. Watch out for the Zorpadorpian on your left.
Eat laser, Bughead!
Great shot, Ollie.
Well, the gravity of Zorpador has taken some getting used to, but, I think I'm improving.
We will have the Zorp crystal in no time. But what were you saying?
I was saying fantasy and sci-fi. I just don't get the appeal. A bunch of made-up peoples and places and nonsense words.
More Zorpadorians incoming. Kill, kill, kill.
I guess on the other hand, I do like it when a writer who knows something about science takes a real technology and pushes it to its limits in a fictional form.
Like Arthur C. Clarke, Alastair Reynolds, Charles Strouse.
Well, yeah, Strauss does stray into space opera a little bit much for my taste.
Space opera is often insipid at best, bleep bloop.
You said it, Radiohead. Just the same old Campbellian monomyth repackaged again and again.
By the way, Ollie, I have confirmed that the powers in the Zorp crystal will allow us to bring the beautiful princess back from the Doom region, thereby fulfilling your destiny as the chosen one.
You're a real pal, Radiohead. The other thing I feel like a lot of space opera does is it takes the same old cultural stereotypes, it barely even bothers to recontextualize them.
Ollie, look, coming out of the Zorpadorian forests.
Oh no, it's a red-skinned savage alien race. They'll kill us both.
No, Ollie, the native peoples of Zorpadorp are noble and in touch with the nature that is all around them.
Oh, well, that's good then. Hey, is that the death ship of Zalaxor the Evil?
He has oppressed the natives for far too long.
Let's get him!
Activate your anti-gravity boots, Ollie.
Done and done, Radiohead. For a true literary experience, though, give me Proust any day of the week.
There is a saturation in his imagery that I can only describe as symphonic.
I have you in my tractor beam now.
Zalaxor, the Evil!
I see you fought off my Zorpadorian mercenaries, but they were only the bait. The Zorp crystal will never be yours. The only thing you can look forward to is a painful death.
Radiohead, I thought the bad guys didn't know we were coming.
Bleep bloop. Apparently, we were betrayed.
Hey, everybody. We're back. During the break, true story, we were talking. We were saying, man, that first half of the podcast felt like all the bricks fell into place pretty neatly. But anytime you try and have this conversation about anything specific, like should I actually read Harry Potter?
Things get really complicated really quick.
Things get complicated really quickly, and you lose your way and you start to feel some real tension about should a Christian read this work of fantasy or that? So you take any specific real world example and you try and think about it, and it gets really complicated. Harry Potter is a great example of that. And
it's one of the best.
It's one of the best. If you want to make space for Harry Potter, let me start this way. So the argument against Harry Potter is what?
Because the what if is actually what if witchcraft, something explicitly forbidden in multiple places in Scripture. What if that were cool and normal and a part of this universe in a way that...
Right.
And and then Rowling goes...
What if it were good? Or what if it were a moral neutral that could be used for good or evil?
Yeah, and Rowling goes out of her way to research actual practicing Wiccans and, use their terminology and the way that they do things, and just weave that through the book.
And so the first way that you might come back is say, well, we've made some space now for violating what we've called the natural law while keeping the moral law. Basically, Harry Potter exists in a traditional moral universe. There's good, there's evil. Sure, it uses some of the language of the occult, but really he's just violating the natural order because he can fly, because he can pick things up, because he can generate unicorn.
It's not the same, even though it uses the language of witchcraft and the occult, it's actually not based in any kind of real occult. They're not summoning demons. There's no actual demonic power behind anything in this universe. This is actually fundamentally not different than the Force in Star Wars. It's just we use wands instead of tapping into some primeval force of nature, and some people are born with it and some people aren't.
To which the person uncomfortable with Harry Potter comes back rightly and says, yeah, that sounds good, but come on. She actually did research the occult, and she's using all this terminology, and you're going to try and make space with your dumb natural order, moral order argument for my kids to learn real occult technology. A real occult terminology and words and ideas, and
it's going to teach my kids to think that these occult things are good and fun and cool. When
how many kids have started to have become? How many people become which actually get into real occultism because they just love the idea of summoning demons?
Well,
nobody. They like the idea of flying or falling in love or achieving things.
Well, but come on, it does also. Okay, I want to jump on board the devil's advocacy train for a second and just say, what how far do we let this stuff go? Like, so I'm going to write there are young adult fantasy novels based around the magic of summoning actual demons.
Right.
And the demon might be like a good character that you love and, you know, that you're very fond of, and you summon the demons and the demons like do stuff for you. Okay, and then there's other, like, it's a common trope. I just watched a Pixar movie.
Well, the genie is a
called
djinn.
Onward.
He's a demon.
He's a demon. That's
So,
right. That's right.
But we can't. There's Aladdin.
No
right?
Aladdin. There goes Aladdin. I just watched Onward from Pixar, which is about, the main plot point is necromancy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Bring back your father from the dead for a day. That's the whole plot of the movie. That's the whole point of the movie is, let's use an occult spell to bring our dad back from the dead. Now, necromancy is one of the grossest things that exists. It's one of the most strongly condemned witchcraft sins in the Bible. Okay, but it's fine in my kids' movie. Or, at what point do you draw a line? Because if every bit of magic or even stuff that is completely contrary to God's moral and natural order can be a beautiful metaphor of relationships in a Pixar movie, then there is no line anymore.
The demons in this thing, they're named demons, but actually they're just friendly
lovable,
spirits that help out and give you cool powers and whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so that brings us to the idea of moral grammar, something that we've decided to collectively as a Warhorn gang over the years to call moral grammar. When we say grammar, we don't just mean terminology. What we mean is imagery, terminology, the way that we feel about things. We should have a feeling of which is bad. I don't like witches.
Right.
Harry Potter makes you not feel that way.
Yeah.
It makes you feel like witches are cool. Hermione Granger is just a cool chick and she's a witch, and that's great. And that's not a feeling that you ultimately want to be inculcated in yourself. There are some things that just simply violate the moral order. Then there are things that do violate the natural order in a way that we've established is acceptable, don't violate the moral order in a way that makes me all that squeamish, do violate moral grammar. Harry Potter is using occultic terminology to talk about stuff that doesn't actually feel that immoral within the confines of the universe that she's created. It's using occultic terminology to talk about flying and doing all the same stuff that a Jedi can do. Now, is there a good reason to be uncomfortable with that? Yes. Is there a good reason to not read Harry Potter for that reason? Yes. Is there a way that you can make some space and say it's not quite the same thing as actually writing a novel that says the occult is good? I think so. And that's where I would personally land. I enjoy the Harry Potter books. I think you have to be very careful, especially with young children. One of the things that bothered Jake that I thought was really interesting was the owls.
Yeah, well, it's just as simple as you actually see in Scripture owls used symbolically as in evil terms, in evil ways. Owls are bad news when they show up in Scripture. And so there's this whole biblical grammar way of thinking symbolically about the world that is undermined by Harry Potter, making owls cool. Owls are actually cool in real life, but they're also something that have this element of
associations with the demonic.
Yeah, in that sense, anything that we enjoy, we have to, I don't want to say carry a suspicion around, but we have to carry a suspicion around. Yeah, I like Marvel movies, but there's a grammar to them. There's like a way that they use stuff that should make me uncomfortable too. If I had kids, I would tell them, we'd talk about it. Talk about Black Widow.
Well, you take the example of Black Widow, where she falls on the spectrum. She actually plays a very womanly, subservient kind of a role in the Avengers.
Yep.
She is kind of a his girl Friday kind of a role. It's, she's just like there to be the buddy helper of whoever the Avenger of the week is, usually Captain America.
And something nice to look at in the process. So not the most elevated womanly role, but it's one that has been working pretty well for the movies now for about 100 years. She also does kung fu. Her body does things that it normally wouldn't. She doesn't ultimately violate the moral order in the sense that she is basically in the place that she should be as a woman in the hierarchy of the way that those movies are written as stories. She does violate the natural order in that she can do things that women can't do.
that violation becomes a violation of the moral order. And
because
that,
she then does things
because
that
she then does
a
things
woman should not
do,
regardless of whether or not they can.
She also violates this idea of moral grammar in that she changes the way that you think about what a woman should do and what a woman can do. So there's a generation of little girls that really do think they can just kickbox.
Well, and there's a generation of little boys that have their, maybe this is as far as we'll go into this, but have their erotic desires changed by watching a woman do what she does. And if that's true, much more true for Wonder Woman, let's say.
Right.
And so there's a deep perversity to it.
The more you blur the lines, the more and it doesn't even really matter where you blur them.
Mm-hmm.
The more you blur the lines, the more you take what you like about women and also take away some of what's scary about them. The more androgynous you push things, that's a real shaping influence. If Black Widow is one of the boys, except hot and ready to follow your lead, well, that's twisting things inside of you.
Mm-hmm.
If you're ready to swallow that whole.
Well, the irony is Ben talked about the power that real young ladies do have. You're actually taking away some of that power.
Well, yeah, because what you're then requiring women to do is become more like men in some ways, not in others.
Right. Which loses them the ability to wield effectively the actual power.
Or they're meshing the wielding of that actual power with the power of domination by force, which is its own realm of perversity. And that's closer to Wonder Woman than Black Widow, if we're talking in these terms. But
yeah. So you have three things to think about there. You have natural order, you have moral order, and you have moral grammar. Maybe another way of saying that is just how it makes you feel, what it kind of inculcates inside you, what it does to you while you're not thinking.
Yeah.
And you have to think about all three. And people are very binary and they don't often think about all three. You know, you'll see some dumb article about Wonder Woman where they don't think about the subversion of the natural order. They don't think about the subversion of moral grammar, the way it makes you feel, the way it changes the way you think about women. All they think about is, on some level, she's still obeying some idea of the moral hierarchy. Like, there are a lot of think pieces.
She has great power, and she's using it to defeat bad guys.
Yeah, which is something that women should do. She's using it to serve,
She's using her power for good.
Now shut up and let me eat my popcorn.
Right.
Yep.
The flip side of that is people who, and I don't want to say that you can't do this. I have sympathy. I have a lot of sympathy for this flip side. But an example of the flip side might be, I will never watch Star Wars at all because Princess Leia simply grabbing a gun, whatever else her function is, I'm so offended by the violation of the natural order there and, well, by all three of them, that I just don't even want to think about it in any more complex terms than that.
Yeah, don't read about JL then, for sure.
Yeah, no kidding. Exactly. It's just like, well, if
those are the people that are bothered by Deborah or JL or, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's like, if I were busting my wife or my sister out of, some horrific prison.
In a fascist space station.
In a fascist space station, and I had an extra gun, I would give it to her.
Right.
And I would expect her to use it. We got to get out of here.
Well, and
the preservation of our lives and your safety depend on us both wielding our blasters.
Into the garbage, flyboy!
And you'd be happy if she was a better shot than you.
Heck yeah, I would.
Yeah. Well, and there are people who are so bound up about all of this that they'd just be like, what? Why would you subvert order that way? Ah! And it's like, I'm not. Right now, the moral order of our survival is taking precedence over.
Well, I mean, this is somewhat related, but it's like our pastors often said, if there were a woman candidate for president who you knew somehow would actually stand against abortion, you would vote for her because actually preventing the killing of those babies is more important than sexual order in that decision.
Or maybe you want to argue it's not, but let's at least make some space for it being a complex issue and not just a given, like you would never vote for her. So I'm not telling you what to think about Harry Potter one way or another. You have to make your own decision about that. You can hear us debate all this in the Bookening podcast over the space of 2 or 3 episodes and come to conclusions if you want a more in-depth discussion. But I think you have to think about all 3 things: natural order, moral order, and moral grammar, or how it makes you feel.
Yeah, and you need to beware of developing strange principles that justify what you like and not what you hate, or not what you're inclined to not like in the process, which is another thing that people really want to do instead of engaging the actual principles at play.
If you're going to give Harry Potter a spanking for making you like witches, you could at least give Tolkien a slap on the wrist for making you like wizards. And then you could say, it's more complicated than that, sure, but let's not try and pretend like the thing that we like is the best and most morally great thing ever, and the thing that we don't like must be intrinsically evil.
But then pretend like we've actually done the work of thinking about it in a more complex way because we've developed a principle that allows us to justify the one and not the other.
Right.
Okay, let's let the principles be honest principles that have integrity across all our applications of them.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's to Lord of the Rings or to Harry Potter or to Narnia or to Star Wars or to Marvel or to whatever else fits in your conglomeration of Disney movies, you know, where we're conjuring up a djinn or where we're casting a spell to bring our dad back from the dead, or we're having a whole celebration of the Day of the Dead, you know, have the Greek gods in Homer or in that Disney classic Hercules or anything in between.
More like Huncules.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, and you also, this is a point I brought up in conversation at one time with Jake and Nathan, but if you were a missionary in Africa and you were dealing with actual witch doctors, chances are good, I think, that you wouldn't read Harry Potter to your kids or let them read it, because the moral grammar would be so confused then, because you have actual witch doctors casting actual spells, interacting with actual demons. You know, yes, you have to consider where you are.
Context is important, actually.
Yeah.
I was just about to say that it is subjective in this sense. There are some people that definitely shouldn't read Harry Potter. If you're the kind of person who's going to be corrupted by that subversion of the moral grammar, if you're the kind of person that really wants to believe that actual witchcraft is cool, if you're tempted by the occult, and then you read a book that's at all confusing about it, that's going to do more damage to you than, I don't know, even to some blasé materialists who just don't care one way or another about those things. So I think
then let's also recognize that there is a world of books and movies out there that are made by blasé materialists that are pressing that order on your life.
Yep.
And every other heresy known to man. The nihilism, the evolutionary garbage, the rationalism. At a certain point, you're stuck with history or historical fiction by Christians who are perfectly orthodox, right? Or maybe some speculative fiction by perfectly orthodox Christians.
Good luck finding that. I'll tell you who wasn't perfectly orthodox was C.S. Lewis.
And even Tolkien.
And even Tolkien, yeah.
I think the more that you actually look into the order, the natural order of Tolkien's Middle Earth, the more bothered you're going to be, if you're honest. So, good luck.
Yeah, but that's why you have to hold these things lightly, too.
Well, yeah. Well, if you're okay with the Force, if it is a function of midichlorians, but not okay with the Force if it's a function of some kind of cosmic Buddhism, then okay, cosmic Buddhism is bad, but materialism is good.
Yeah, cosmic atheism.
Like, come on, guys. Like, just be honest with yourself about what you're doing and make your decisions in good faith.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we believe that a moral Christian man can make decisions to enjoy some of this stuff. I mean, we've done a lot of podcasts about Harry Potter and Star Wars. We like that stuff, but you got to be careful about it. You got to actually think about it. You got to be willing to say no to some stuff. I mean, it's such a dumb, low bar thing, my test, but my test with young men especially is just...
I want to keep coming back at this. What's more dangerous to your kids? Cosmic Buddhism or crass materialism? Okay, just saying. All right, Please proceed.
Yes.
Because context matters.
Yeah. In the context that if you're in the West, like in America, your kids are probably going to be more tempted by cosmic atheism than they are by cosmic Buddhism.
Oh, I think honestly they're practically the same thing in America because you can have both. You do have, in practice, in my experience, you have a soft Buddhism and a hard materialism, and they're perfectly compatible.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know.
Okay, fine, fair point.
Well, anyway, here's my test. Can you just tell me one thing that you've said no to, please? I know that that's such a lame, borderline immoral, low bar. But man, especially when I talk to young people, it's like, can you just prove to me, please?
You're willing to draw some line
You'll draw
somewhere.
some line. And if it's no Harry Potter, yes Lord of the Rings, fine. I don't really care.
No Marvel, yes Harry Potter?
Yeah. If it's completely
Okay.
arbitrary and you're just being an idiot because you actually don't like the one and you do like the other.
Then we still need to talk.
But if you can tell me, like, man, I think Game of Thrones would be cool, but man, it is just nihilistic and I don't need to see all that sex. And so I'm not going to do it. That goes a long way towards earning my trust because you've proved that you can have a little self-discipline and a little thoughtfulness and you'll say no to yourself. So say no to something, please, for goodness sake. Is there anything else that needs to be said, guys?
I don't think so.
Not now, anyway.
Yeah, we'll have more of a chance to talk about this in our sci-fi series coming up in a few months.
Great.
And Dune will be a very interesting thing to tackle given all of this. Like, what is Dune trying to say exactly? That's an interesting question. But we'll get there. All right. What's this? Ben's hopping on his unicorn?
That's right.
Jake's pulling out his golden sword?
It's just a horse.
Oh, it's just a horse?
But modified.
And Jake, is that... Oh, that's like... What is that, tinfoil? What is that sword?
It's gold. It's gold.
Yeah.
I think it might be paper mache pen.
Oh, man.
And gold spray paint.
Well, it's just make-believe, Nathan. It's all right.
Yeah, that's true. All right. I'm going to float away from my microphone now.
Wow.
Bye!
Man, you gotta laugh like that all the time. I mean, I know you're evil and whatever, but
I agree. Bleep bloop. There is 1,000% too much evil laughter.
It's what I do.
well, see, Radiohead, this is just the kind of thing I don't like in most fantasy books. Same old evil villain. I guess this is life imitating art, huh?
You said it, Ollie. Bleep bloop.
What? That is entirely unfair. How many space villains do you know that read Marcel Proust?
0?
Wrong. 1. Because you know me.
But Zalaxor, the evil, I am confused. Are you saying you are really a fan of Proust?
There's a saturation in his imagery that is almost symphonic.
Wow.
Yes. Wow. Bleep bloop. This is what I was saying earlier.
I find realism is the key ingredient to good art, and Proust is the greatest writer of realism. Other than Proust, I enjoy any novel about a professor having an affair.
But that's like every novel these days.
Every novel that's not science fiction or fantasy.
Ollie, bleep bloop. I am beginning to rethink my snobbery towards speculative fiction.
Yeah, me too, Radiohead.
You won't have much time to rethink your snobbery before you die a horrible death in the snafus of Dreb.
Not the snafus of Dreb.
Not the snafus of Dreb.
What is the snafus of Dreb?
Before I throw you into the snafus
Of Dreb?
the very same. How about I read you a story by Annie Proulx, author of Brokeback Mountain?
No!
A fate worse than disintegration.
I guess this proves that science fiction and fantasy are legitimate genres, Radiohead.
Yes, Ollie. Also that so-called literary novels are generally terrible.
I don't see how you've proved that at all.
Good thing we don't have to make an actual argument, Zalaxor. Not with the crystal Azorpidor in our possession.
What? That's impossible!
It is possible when you use time-traveling technology in a really cool way. Bleep bloop.
Fooled you, Zalaxor. Now you're toast. No!
Sound of Sanity was produced by Nathan, associate produced by Ben, and executive produced by me and Nathan. For more great content or for special bonus content, support us today at patreon.com/Sound of Sanity. And until next time,
Stay fantastic.